Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today we're wrapping up all the books I read in November. So, I am currently recovering from flu. So, if I sound a little bit Barry White, you know why. Also, I'm going to have to do a lot of editing out of sniffing and coughing and general ness. So, apologies for that. Also, well, you won't see it, so apologies to editing me, really. But yes, anyway, back to the wrap-up. So, I thought I had prepared this. However, I have no stats. I did not write them down. So, yeah, we're just gonna go statless. Is that even a thing? Right, so I read in November 9 books, I think, and I DNF'd 2. And last month I thought it was quite fun to do it from like most pants to most amazing. So we'll start with pants ones again this month. So we're going to start with the DNFs. So the first book I DNF'd was The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman. So this was the group pick for Historathon. I thought it sounded really interesting. So this is about a girl who is a twin, and when she is younger she's told that her twin died of pneumonia, but then like 5 years later she finds out that her sister is actually very much alive and had been placed in Willowbrook school for sort of challenging children, which is basically where children with any sort of disability or additional needs was placed. It wasn't a school at all, it was like a torture centre, and she finds this out because her sister has escaped, and then she sort of goes and tries to find what has happened to her sister. Premise sounded great. It's based on a real place. Willowbrook School was a real place that got shut down, I think, in the 80s. However, I was listening to this on audio. I got probably a third of the way through and it was fine, but I just didn't really care about the main character. And it was one of those books that I think I could have finished and it would have been a 3-star. It would have been a meh. I'd have forgotten about it in a few weeks and it just would have been fine. And I couldn't be bothered with a book that was just fine. I wanted great books, so I just DNF'd it. I just cut it out of my life. I was like, no, I just don't care enough to continue this book. So that got axed. The next book I DNF'd was Glory by Noviolet Bulawayo. So this was longlisted and shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year. It was billed as a Zimbabwean animal farm. It isn't really anything like Animal Farm, apart from the fact that it features farmyard animals, and it's sort of politically motivated. So this is sort of reimagining the Zimbabwean coup and sort of the legacy, I suppose, of Mugabe through the voice of farmyard animals. In theory, that sounds interesting, an interesting concept. However, I just didn't. I just couldn't get on board with the animals. The animals were a gimmick. They were a way for this author to, I suppose, highlight her book and make it more visible and more intriguing, I think, to audiences at large. And I watched a video by Sarah at Freshly Read Books who reviewed this, and she reviewed it beautifully, and she talked about the animal side of things in a lot more elegance and nuance than I'm currently doing, so I'll link her video below. But basically these animals, they weren't really animals at all. They were people, but we were calling them animals. because animals can't check social media and drink tea. And so it just kept taking me out of the story, and I just couldn't connect with it. I also found it very, very aggressive, and that's not an issue in itself, but I felt like there was no nuance, there was no high and low. It was all high aggression, political stuff, which I suppose it was in those days in Zimbabwe, especially when we're talking about the politicians, which this very much is. But it just was a bit intense, and the animals really annoyed me. So I left my bookmark so you can see I got, what is this, like 100 pages in, 100 pages, and I just wasn't enjoying it. So that's got DNF'd as well. Soz, I know a lot of people like that, but it wasn't for me. Next up, so we move from DNFs straight to 3-star reads, and this is my biggest disappointment probably of the year. I have done a solo review for it, and it's Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. If you want to see more of my thoughts on why this was a disappointment, I will leave that video linked below. But basically, I wanted Medusa's story from this, and I got the stories of Perseus and Athena, and yeah, it just didn't work for me. It was similar in narrative style to 1,000 Ships, with the various different characters telling different parts, but it just didn't work as well as 1,000 Ships for me. And it was fine. It was a fine myth retelling, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I was just really disappointed. And that's actually my only 3-star. We then move on to 4 stars, and we have Hollowpox by not by Morgan Crow. We have Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend. So I read this to my eldest son Sam. We've been reading this series all year, and this is the 3rd in the Morgan Crow series. So there's not a huge amount I can tell you about this because it is the 3rd in a series, but we do get some more world building in this, particularly around wonimals, which are like wondrous animals, which I thought was really good. Morgan Crow is a young girl who sort of grows up thinking she's a cursed child and that she's going to die on her 12th birthday, something like that, but she gets whisked off to Nevermore, and she sort of discovers this life and this sort of found family in Nevermore. This was a chunky old book. This was nearly 500 pages, which is quite big for a children's book, but Sam adores this series. He's really sad that it's finished now because the next one's not due out until next November, but he adored it. I thought it was fine, so I'd have given it 3 stars. He'd have given it 5, so I gave it 4. But yeah, a good continuation of the series, but I wouldn't say it's my favourite middle grade to read as an adult, but as a child, clearly it's got something going for it. Then in 7th we have Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. So this is going to come up in my my bookie bank video, which will be coming out hopefully the next video after this one. And this is a graphic novel where we follow Nimona, who joins sort of the baddie in a fantastical world to be his sidekick. She wants to help him like rule the world or whatever, take down the goodies, and it was just really lovely. I really enjoyed it. I finished it in like a day and a half, and it was just what I needed. It was quite heartwarming. There were some nice messages around found family and what makes an individual, what makes a monster, those sorts of things. And I just thought it was really, really lovely, and I would recommend, if you're looking for a nice light-hearted fantasy graphic novel, then yes, this one ticked all of the boxes for exactly what I was in the mood for, and I adored it. So yes, would recommend. Then next up we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. So I've been reading this for a while and I finished it right at the beginning of November, about 6 weeks later than scheduled, but I finished it nonetheless, and I really, really loved it. The Count of Monte Cristo is at the heart of it, a revenge story. We have Esmond Dantes, who is imprisoned for something that he doesn't really understand. He's set up by people who he thinks are his friends, and when he's in prison he sort of stews on this for a few years, and when he gets out of prison he has an elaborate revenge plan. What I really liked about this book was all the different threads. So you do have a lot of characters. One thing that I wish I'd done is like made a character map at the beginning. Also, characters change names like sort of about a third of the way through. So I was like, is that the same character as that from the beginning of the book? And sort of trying to link it through. But you something will happen and you'll be like, I don't know how that's relevant to the plot. And then about 150 pages later, you'll be like, that is how it's relevant to the plot. And it was just really well like woven together. I really loved it. I really loved Esmond Dantes's character. I definitely felt that he was the one with the best character arc, the best sort of understanding of him from the perspective of the reader. That was really badly worded, but hopefully you know what I mean. I did like several of the other characters as well. It was very long, at over 1,200 pages. I felt like it probably could have been edited a bit squished down, but I did really enjoy it, and it was a very accessible read. It would have been a fast read had I not basically lost stamina with it at about the 700 page mark, but yeah, brilliant, and I definitely want to read more of Dumas' work. Next up, surprise, Cain by Jose Saramago, translated by Margaret Jull from the Portuguese. So lastminute.com, I decided to join the World Cup readathon, which is hosted by Book Time with Elvis. I will link his channel below, and I've missed a couple of Mark's previous sort of iterations of this. He did one for the Euros and one for the African Cup of Nations, I think, and I was like, no, I really want to join that. So by the skin of my teeth, I managed to join this one, and the country that I was allocated was Portugal, so I needed to read a book by a Portuguese author. I had no idea where to start. I heard Saramago was good, and this was the shortest one I could find. So I picked it up on audio, and this book is basically Saramago ripping the shit out of the Old Testament for 4 hours. So if that doesn't sound like your jam, it probably isn't. If it is your jam, oh my god, it's so funny. I was like hysterically laughing for most of this book. It was so well done, very, very tongue-in-cheek, very sarcastic, and it was just my sort of humour. If you like that sort of sarcastic humour, then you definitely need to pick up this book because it was so good. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did, but it was bloody brilliant. So yes, highly recommend. Very underrated. Never seen anyone talk about this book before. Why? I do not know, because it was so good. Read this book. Next up, and I think we are in 5-star territory. So we have a Becky Chambers. I am clearly on a very Becky Chambers kick over the last couple of months, in case you hadn't noticed. And I picked up a prayer for the Crown Shy, which is the second in the Monk and Robot series. I don't know if I think there's going to be more based on what happened in this book, but basically it's a direct continuation from the first one, where we're following a non-binary monk, Dex, and their robot friend, and it was just lovely. Dex and what is the robot's name? Roz, I think, are just travelling through this world, and you sort of see things within this world which are just really interesting concepts about sort of capitalism and social interactions. And I really love Becky Chambers' concept work and the way she really thinks outside of a box to to create things that I haven't seen in books before. So yeah, this was a novella, very short, but I really, really adored it. So yeah, Becky Chambers delivered again. Then in third place for the month, we have East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which I read with my lovely friend Sonia. And this was a reread for me, but I read this book probably about 15 years ago and could remember nothing. Well, little tiny snippets mainly about the scenery, oddly enough. But it was so good. I really loved it again on a reread. The baddie in this, Kathy, she is a very good baddie. She, just one of those characters that you really love to hate. And I think having read Cain in the same month, it gave me a little bit more sort of understanding of sort of the Adam and Eve story within the Bible, which I wasn't that familiar with before, but then knowing more about that, you can see the parallels within this book, and it parallels across generations. So it's a multi-generational epic saga. My favourite kind of book. So you see like brothers and twins as you sort of come down, and there's two families and interactions, and it's just so good. It's just so good. I can't explain. If you don't pick up any other Steinbeck, this is the Steinbeck you need to read. It's just so good. It's just so good. I can't say any more because my brain has been addled by flu, but loved it. Then second, we have Becoming by Michelle Obama. So I read this for non-fiction in November, and I had high hopes for this going in. It's had rave reviews. Everyone says it's really good, but then obviously sometimes that happens and it's a bit crap. But not with this one. This is brilliant. I did audiobook this, and it's narrated by Obama herself, which I think added a lot to it. It added a depth to it for me that I don't think I'd have got from reading it physically. And within this, she talks about her time before she meets Barack, sort of going to school and dealing with being a woman and being black and being a black woman, and the challenges that presented to her and how she overcame those. And then she talks about her relationship with Barack and his decision to run for senator and obviously ultimately president, and about their life in the White House, raising two children and obviously running the country, and what her role is as first woman, and how she will always be the first black woman in the White House, and the legacy she wanted to leave around that. And I just thought it was brilliant. I particularly loved all of her commentary around trying to raise children in that environment and how difficult that was, and how her and Barack really tried to give them as normal a childhood as they could. I mean, it was never going to be normal in the sense of the word that I would know it as, or you would know it as, but she's just such a down-to-earth, genuine person, just trying to do what she can where she can, and yeah, it just shone through. It was just a brilliant read. I would highly recommend it. I am not in any way interested in American politics or celebrities really, but this really just spoke to me as a woman and a mother, and yeah, it was fab. Highly recommend. And my number one book of the month was A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. So I buddy read this with a lovely group of people that I've been reading a lot of sci-fi with this year, and I read the first book in the series with also so Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot, Sarah at Freshie Read Books, and Fraser Simons at Springboard Thoughts. And I definitely was the one who loved this the most out of the four of us. This is not a direct continuation from the first book. In fact, I don't think you even would need to read the first book to read this, though there is elements of world building and sort of like the interspecies stuff that I think means that you get more out of this if you have read the first one. But the characters are effectively all different. They're side characters from the first book that feature within this, but I really enjoyed it. We sort of have a dual narrative. We're following two characters and seeing sort of one of their backstories and one of them sort of coming to terms with a life that's very different from what they had expected. And I just loved it. I just love Becky Chambers' writing, and sort of, as I mentioned before with A Prayer for the Crown Shy, I just think her concept work is really good, and I really like the way she reimagines the way different people could be and different socio-economical systems could be. And yeah, I just loved it. I just loved it. So I will be continuing that series with that group of people, reading the third one in January, I believe. So that's it. That's the, I think, nine books that I read and 2 books that I DNF'd in November. I would love to know what your favourite book was of November. Oh my god, brain is frazzled. Yes, if you wanted to see my review for Stone Blind, I'll leave that here, and I'll see you very soon with another one. Bye guys.